Ikari, you suck. Get in the robot. It's episode 41 of NES Works. Well, we go from one of the NES's absolute best to one of its absolute worst. What a tempestuous year 1987 was for video games. In fairness, Ikari Warriors had the odds stacked against it from the start. This port of SNK's brilliant cooperative coin-op commando clone was going to be missing something no matter what. In arcades, Ikari Warriors used an innovative rotary joystick that allowed players to move in one direction and fire in another. It basically allowed you to mimic the dual-stick design of Robotron 2084 on a single stick, leaving your offhand free to hit the fire button and chuck grenades. The top of the joystick shaft could be rotated in either direction, while the base of the stick still functioned as an 8-directional lever. Imagine sticking the spinner from Tempest on top of a standard joystick, and you get the idea. This allowed for fast-paced, freewheeling action that upped the ante for commando-style shooters. Protagonists Ralph and Clark proved to be versatile heroes, able to attack with all their weapons in 8 directions while moving independently in any other direction. This gives Ikari Warriors a distinct look and feel. Rather than snappily swapping their aim to match the current direction of their movement, Ralph and Clark instead have a distinct turret-like approach to combat that causes them to rake the field with fire as players swivel their aim. This makes perfect sense once you realize you can hop into tanks and literalize the turret metaphor. It also makes the game impossible to duplicate precisely on the NES's control pad. There's simply no way to translate the rotary stick mechanic to a D-pad in a satisfactory way, meaning Ikari Warriors on NES was a losing proposition from the outset. Still, a strong developer probably could have sorted out something. Capcom, for example, has already by this point begun to adopt its philosophy of completely rebuilding its arcade games for NES to better fit within the limitations and home setting of the console. In fact, we'll see that in full effect soon with Section Z. Alas, Ikari Warriors is not a Capcom game. On the contrary, it's a direct competitor that one-ups one of Capcom's biggest hits. No, this game hails from fellow Kansai-based studio SNK. We've seen SNK over on Game Boy Works with puzzle action game Dexterity, but Ikari Warriors marks their NES debut. And what do Kansai-based developers do when they're first getting their feet wet on NES? That's right, they reach out to contractors. In this case, SNK reached out to Micronix. Micronix, alas, ain't a great developer, or even a good one for that matter. Remember the absolute jank that defined 1942 in Ghosts and Goblins? The stuttering frame rates and sprite rendering, the glitchy displays, the bugs, the occasional refusal by the system to even acknowledge button presses? Well, those are all back, but this time in an even more complex and hectic setting than we've seen before. I'd like to be able to say that this is where Micronix rises to the task and comes into its own, but alas, they simply drag Ikari Warriors down to their level. Micronix did exactly one thing right with Ikari Warriors. They added an infinite continue code. Whenever you run out of lives, which happens every minute or so, you can press ABBA to respawn where you fell. Yet even the immortal powers of ABBA can't necessarily help you complete this game. Ikari Warriors is a mess, and even back when I was a kid, with the patience to chew through difficult games like Battletoads and Contra, I couldn't finish Ikari Warriors. Both times I tried, the ABBA code would cause me to spawn in a dead end and prevent me from moving ahead. Now in the arcade version, there's a kill feature that prevents you from staying in one place too long, but Micronix removed that here. And even with the ABBA code, this is a long, tedious game consisting of 4 stages that take about half an hour to complete a piece. It becomes even more of a chore once you reach the 3rd stage, where enemy grenadiers guard narrow gates while perched on platforms that put them just out of reach of your own attacks. Pools of water cause you to move at half speed, and sloping ramps out of the water cause you to plod along even more slowly than that. Of course, you can't fire and move independently here. Even a dual controller setup, like the one supported by Robotron 2084 on Atari 2600, is out of the question, because the only thing that makes Ikari Warriors on NES even vaguely bearable is its cooperative play feature. So you need to leave controller 2 free for whatever hapless fool you sucker into suffering this ordeal with you. But I kid. Ikari Warriors is actually the first NES game to feature cooperative action along these lines. It's a much more intense game than Ice Climber. As a result, the game still has a fair amount of fondness among certain fans. It's not a great game, but it let you play with a friend or a sibling, and that counts for a lot. Ikari Warriors may have lost the rotary stick on NES, but here's the kicker. The aiming mechanics still behave like in the arcade. You don't snap to fire in whichever direction you're facing, but rather rotate slowly whenever you turn. Since your aim is tied to your movement here, this forces you to press into whatever you're trying to hit. The deadliest enemies in this game are the soldiers who just walk up to you to attack without firing, because there's literally no way to defend yourself against them. To shoot them, you'd have to move toward them, which means you'll die on contact when you hit them before being able to bring your sights around to face them. It's downright enraging. And Ikari Warriors would already be insanely difficult even without this interface limitation. The game is extremely asymmetric, with scores of enemies who attack unpredictably and in huge numbers. You can collect power-ups, but most of them are kind of worthless. The L for long-range fire is great, and the Athena cameo is a fun teaser for an upcoming NES release, but most power-ups are like the fire gun, which turns your bullets red and creates a tiny flame effect graphic on impact, but has little appreciable effect beyond that. To Micronic's credit, there is a lot happening on the screen all at once. But in this case, that just makes the game even more unfairly difficult. Consider the behavior of grenades. Ralph and Clark's grenades allow them to hit targets that might be out of vertical range of their gun attacks, but their grenades have tiny impacts when they explode. Enemy grenades, on the other hand, have a massive splash damage radius, as do all other enemy explosives. Because the heroes move so slowly, it's almost impossible to move out of the range of an explosion even if you see the projectile coming from across the screen. This is just an insanely harsh, unforgiving game in every respect, and Micronix clearly spent no time thinking about making it manageable. The ABBA code is simply their band-aid, not an attempt to heal the bone-deep ailment that troubles this port. It's a shame because there is a lot about Ikari Warriors that would be pretty interesting in a better-made game. For one thing, the heroes have consistent weapon-wielding mechanics. They hold their machine guns in one hand and toss grenades with the other, which forces you to line up your attacks beyond just pointing at bad guys and shooting, something we'll see used to better effect in The Legend of Zelda. There's also a great chain reaction effect on explosions. While it's entirely too easy to get caught up in a chain of explosions you set off, because this game is definitely like that, there's a huge amount of satisfaction to be had when you spark a line of detonations that wipes the enemies from the entire screen. And hopping into a tank or helicopter to gun down enemy hordes is great. The rotary firing mechanics feel a little more natural and less unforgiving this way, mainly because you don't have to worry about small arms fire or collisions with foot soldiers. The durability of the tank means you can take your time while controlling a vehicle to aim properly, something that's impossible on foot. Of course, your tank excursions are inevitably short-lived because some random bad guy will toss a grenade at you out of nowhere, or a kamikaze soldier will run up to you and explode, but these brief moments of unbalanced mayhem are the closest this game ever gets to fun. If you can survive long enough, Ikari Warriors gets pretty weird. Eventually you start fighting bizarre berserkers, and then swarms of insects who, swear to God, behave exactly like Galaga enemies. The ugly graphics start turning weird colors to break up the brown and gray, and you battle through skull fortresses and complex causeways over pools of water. There are also a couple of weird as heck bosses like the guy you have to murder at the end of Stage 3, who just sits there while his cronies attack. And that's as far as I've ever made it, because you have to find a hidden passage at the end of Stage 3 in order to advance, while being bombarded by enemy missiles, and the continue code briefly stops working here. So I ran out of lives while recording, and I couldn't stomach the thought of playing another hour and a half just to get back to this point again. Oh well. I can't honestly believe that this game somehow radically becomes better and more polished in the final level anyway. The original arcade version will soon see a home release, finally, on Switch, through the SNK 40th Anniversary Collection. While Switch doesn't have rotary controls, it does have enough interface options to make a decent simulation of the experience possible. After 3 decades, Nintendo fans can finally play a version of Ikari Warriors that doesn't make them question their will to live. By the way, in Japan, Ikari Warriors is simply called Ikari. That means anger. At least there's some truth in advertising here. Meanwhile, on the flip side of this episode, we have a failure that's wholly mine, rather than some developers. Family Fun Fitness Athletic World is the first game to require a peripheral that isn't the zapper, which I didn't realize until I sat down to record footage. Whoops. Athletic World belongs to a series of games published by our friends at Bandai that evidently try to head off parental complaints that video games are bad and make kids into lazy blobs of fat by demanding the use of a controller that is, in fact, a fancy exercise mat. I'm not sure it's entirely successful, but Nintendo sure liked the idea. They ended up bringing the Family Fun Fitness series in-house, rebranded as first-party releases, and even sold an NES console set that included the Power Pad accessory. If you're familiar with the Family Fun Fitness series at all, it's because of the infamous Stadium events, whose release coincided with Nintendo's decision to bring Bandai's games under their own wing. A handful of copies of that game made it into the world as Stadium events before being recalled immediately prior to launch and repackaged as world-class track meet. A complete copy of Stadium events commands prices in the tens of thousands of dollars. Athletic World, on the other hand, does not. It's the forgotten sibling, the child left out of the spotlight. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to track down the Athletic World Power Pad bundle set Bandai shipped back in 1987, so I can't actually play the game yet. That means we'll have to circle back around to discuss how well it works as a piece of entertainment once we get to world-class track meet. I can, however, give you the overview. Athletic World contains 5 different events, all controlled by dashing about on the Power Pad. It's a lot like the running events in track and field, except with controls that are even easier to manipulate. The Power Pad is hardly the Wii balance board in terms of complexity, so it doesn't know if you're actually standing on it. It didn't take long for kids back in the day to realize that you'd have a much easier time with the game if you knelt down and smashed the inputs with your hands, rather than attempting to play correctly by running. While this is the first Bandai release of 1987, it's the second this year from developer Tri. Or had they renamed themselves to Human Entertainment by this point? There's conflicting information online, but in any case, Athletic World comes to us from the same studio that gave us Pro Wrestling. I won't pretend that this is anywhere near as memorable as Pro Wrestling, but there are fun little graphical details here that speak to the kind of effort Tri and Human invested into their work. It's a solid piece of programming with decent graphics and a fair bit of novelty appeal thanks to its dependence on a wacky peripheral. Did it really help prevent kids from being transformed into sedentary lumps of garbage by video games? Probably not, but in terms of games your parents bought because they thought it would be good for you, this sure beats the console's edutainment library. We'll look deeper into Athletic World somewhere down the line. For now, the next episode will see the NES debut of Tecmo kicking off a string of more than half a dozen absolutely top-flight NES releases.